The origin of Sway comes from my background as a designer. I spent a good chunk of my career building brand and packaging systems for different companies. And I'm also a big fan of the idea of leave it better than you found it. It's like a common mantra for folks who love to spend time outdoors. And so I became really obsessed with the concept of circularity and regenerative design, which is increasingly a common term in the design industry. And I thought, how can I, as a designer, investigate new materials and make them accessible to people? And looking at what was available on the market, everything felt like a partial fix. So I just went on this hunt and became a little bit obsessed with like all the possible materials that could be turned into packaging, and stumbled upon seaweed. And that was really the aha moment, because I grew up next to the ocean and I understand ocean ecosystems and I know what seaweed does underwater. And I thought, if I can extend the beauty of seaweed onto land to replace plastics, that would be like the dream. So that's the very broad introduction.
There is, tell me if you agree with this. From my view, pre-COVID, there was gaining momentum behind, oh wow, plastics are a real problem, we got to do something about this. Mm-hmm. And then when COVID happened, it felt like, first of all of our attention was focused there. And then a lot of the safety protocols had plastic involved. I felt like plastic, almost the momentum we had on plastic almost took a step backwards in some ways, or maybe at least a pause. Mm-hmm. And so I'm guessing for someone like you, if you agree, I don't know if you agree with it or not, that you're like, hey, let's get back on that train. Let's get back on this momentum, right? Because we were making momentum on this. It felt like, mm-hmm. And that could just be my skewed view of how I was seeing things, but that was my perception. And I hope that we can get back on it because it is this overwhelming thing that we have to start making progress on.
Absolutely. I think the pandemic has highlighted the importance of plastics and the reasons that we do depend on them. Like, plastic is amazing. It is hygienic. It enables us to be clean and safe. So there is a role for it to play. But, all these brands have committed to really aggressive goals to remove plastics from their supply chain, and they're trying to hit these 2025 targets. And I totally agree that the past 2 years have felt like a slowing of that momentum. And now, all of a sudden, with things lifting up, we've got 3 years to really make a huge amount of progress. And the categories of removing plastics are just eliminating the material, reuse systems, recycling systems, and compostables. The last one is where we fall, and it's the one that needs the most work. So definitely feel the pressure and the urgency right now.
Whenever you're talking about your organization, your products, are there certain messaging points that you have where you see the lights go on and people are like, oh wow, this is exciting, or I haven't heard it that way? Like, what in conversation, when do you see people like get it?
I love to paint a picture of what's happening underwater, because most folks don't live next to the ocean and don't have maybe an idea of what an ocean forest is, or just the sheer vastness of the ocean, period. Like, it's 70% of Earth's surface is ocean. 94% of Earth's wildlife is under the water. So I love to paint this picture. Seaweed has been on Earth for about 1 billion years. And for that time, it's contributed like 50% of Earth's oxygen. Like, every other breath that you breathe comes from the ocean and seaweed and algae. It's, for 1 billion years provided habitat for biodiverse life. It's provided food for life under the water and on land. And we have an opportunity right now to support those ecosystems and extend that impact by creating new materials derived from them. I tend to see folks kind of get interested about, what's under the water?
My assumption is that when you're talking with people, they can only visualize part of what the process you're talking about. They understand that plastic is an issue. They understand that the waste doesn't go away. Mm-hmm. They may not be able to visualize the process and the inputs of what creates that plastic, which is an issue. And then when you talk about your solution, it's easy for us to picture, forests in the Amazon. It's really hard for us to picture forests, seaweed forests underneath the ocean, right? Like it's just not visible. So in some ways, that's probably an obstacle for you because you're illustrating something that maybe they've not thought about before.
Mhm.
But it's also probably I'm guessing a positive because you sort of understand something that maybe is interesting to them. And maybe they lean in and try to understand something that they haven't really thought through before.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, the Amazon's a great comparison because there's approximately as much ocean forest as there is Amazon forest. There's 7 million square kilometers of ocean forest growing underwater, which is roughly the same size as the Amazon rainforest, not just geographically, but also in terms of its contribution to carbon sequestration and habitat. So that's a great one-to-one comparison. And I think the more that we can kind of create those comparisons, it's like you open up people's imaginations around what's possible and what solutions might be at sea. A phrasing that I really like is, we often view the ocean as the victim in a lot of cases, particularly of plastic pollution. But in our case, it's the source of the solutions too. So we can help protect the ocean in more ways than one and kind of make it the hero of this plastic saga. But something else you just said really kind of strikes a chord, because I think a lot of folks do think of the plastic problem as we don't have a place to put it, there's too much of it, don't know what to do with it, we're killing the turtles. But actually, the root cause of plastics and a good chunk of why they're so evil is because they're made from fossil fuels. And plastics are actually driving the fossil fuel industry. Like 20% of net growth in demand for oil comes from plastics. So divesting from plastics is also a divestment from the fossil fuel industry. It's like quite urgent.
Yeah, where are you at on this? Is a very long-term and sort of daunting challenge that you're taking on and you're chipping away at it. Where would you say you're at on that journey? Like what's some of the maybe successes that you've had, the progress that you're proud of so far, and like what do you see ahead of you as well?
Yeah, so we at Sway specifically focused on replacing thin film plastics. So that's bags and wrappers and pouches and these really annoying plastics that float out of landfills into the ocean or into sewage systems or can't be recycled. There are 5 trillion of those single-use plastic items produced every year. We're starting with poly bags because they're quite a simple material, single layer, doesn't need to be, the highest performance. And there's 180 billion of them every year produced and used in the fashion industry. Some recent successes were that we were announced as finalists in the Tom Ford Plastic Innovation Prize earlier this spring. And that prize is designed by literally the coolest folks in the game, Tom Ford, Stella McCartney, Nike, and they're looking for next generation solutions for plastics. So it's really cool to be included in that cohort of solutions. We're scaling up right now to do pilots with some of those brands. And it's our expectation that we'll be scaling up for public launch early next year. So that right now is the moment.
That's awesome. I imagine like with all solutions like this, there's a green premium that comes along with that. How would you describe what that looks like today and where do you think it can go in the near term?
Yeah, we're aiming to be competitive with the other bioplastics that exist on the market. And it's really important to clarify some of the like nuances within plastic replacements. So there's bioplastics like PLA, which are derived from corn, or PHA, which is a fermentation process of like agricultural waste. And then there are biomaterials, which are chemically completely distinct from plastic at all. So it wouldn't even be appropriate to call them bioplastics. And that's the bucket that we're falling within. It's taking the natural polymers that nature's already given us and making them fit within traditional infrastructure. So if we can do that, fit within traditional infrastructure, we can eventually be competitive with those other, corn or fermented feedstocks that are pretty readily available. But I think that green premium, I mean, tell me what you think about this, the green premium, like how it's framed. I don't think it calculates the true cost of the alternative. Like what is the true cost of plastics? Looking at the entire supply chain from production to pollution at the end of life.
Yeah, we subsidize everything we do because we don't think about the true costs and the externalities of the things that we choose. We just look at the cost today and disregard what it took to bring it to us and what it's going to do after us, right?
Right. It's quite expensive actually to invest in plastics. If you think about not just like the ecological harm that's done through the production of fossil fuels, but the human health that's caused by processing fossil fuels and then polluting environment and then making plastics that are able to infiltrate literally our blood or all these natural spaces that we're trying to enjoy. They make it into the air, into the water that we drink. It's everywhere. That feels very expensive to me.
Yeah. So I want to go back to the other sort of the category that you framed yourself as being within, and there's alternatives that are corn-based and other byproduct as inputs. I would assume, and I think one of the things that's cool about this sector is that I see a lot of people like supporting each other and applauding other brands because you're ultimately after the same goal and it's not as like cutthroat competitive, which I think is very cool. And I bet with everybody in your category, you would probably applaud what they're trying to do and what they're building. But whenever I heard, and you know this far better than I, so what I heard you say is, let's say there's a corn base, which is great, but yours is seaweed based. And I would imagine that the process to produce the inputs needed is a far more sustainable process for what you're doing based on how that is grown and how that's harvested. Am I correct on that, or would you say it's difficult math to
it depends. But yes, as an overarching theme, absolutely. I would say folks within climate tech and within new materials are applauding each other and supporting each other. And there's definitely that environment, which I love, because it's not like one solution is going to solve all the problems. We'll need an ecosystem of solutions. It's like very, nature inspired. Lots of different materials will help us solve this problem, and they can all exist to support each other. And no hate towards, by the way, like towards PLA or PHA or any of the other alternatives, because I think that there's always trade-offs with any material. Seaweed is just such an easy feedstock to fall in love with, though, because what it does underwater is replenishes ecosystems, reverses the effects of ocean acidification, which is caused by climate change and like rising temperatures. It sequesters carbon, like more carbon in some cases than land trees. There are ocean trees growing underwater sequestering carbon. But then it's just a really efficient crop to grow. It grows 20 to 30 times faster than corn or sugarcane. Don't need land, don't need fresh water, don't need pesticides. It grows. Some species, there's 10,000 plus species of seaweed. Some of them grow year round. You can harvest them every 3 to 4 weeks. So it's just a really giving, benevolent, inherently regenerative feedstock, and it makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
You'll have to forgive my ignorance on this, but I live closer to corn than I do to seaweed. What does the sort of growing and harvesting process look like?
So there's wild harvested seaweeds and there's ocean farmed seaweeds. And we try to prioritize working with ocean farms because, well, we want to be like adding more nutrients to ocean ecosystems. Depending on the species, there's different methods of farming seaweed. The seaweed that gets the most time in the spotlight are a lot of like brown kelp. It's the big stuff, the big brown ribbony stuff. What you do is you seed a line of rope, put it in the water, suspended between buoys, and it grows down like hair. And then when you harvest it, you basically give it a haircut. So that's one method. Another method is you've got little sprigs of seaweed, basically. This is more in tropical climates, that are tied with just a little raffia string to ropes. And you harvest it and then it regenerates. And then you harvest it and it regenerates every 3 to 4 weeks, really, really rapid. If you visit a seaweed farm in Maine, not going to be a whole lot to see. It's deep, cold water growing up, and the seaweed's growing up and down the water column. If you go to visit a farm in Indonesia, it's turquoise, warm water that comes up to your knees, shallow. You can see exactly what's happening. So visit a few to tell me which one you like, which method you like the best. But it's happening all over the world, and it has been for hundreds of years.
That's really cool. As you've been on this journey, what has been some of the more kind of difficult obstacles that you've cleared and are happy to have cleared, that you look back like, that's a tough one, but we got past it?
I think the big one that comes to mind most immediately, I don't think we've cleared it, but we have a better sense now, is we have very big dreams as an organization. My team, we're a team of 10 now, still very small, but we have this really big dream of all the impact that we can enact. We want to create healthier oceans and bring these new materials to everyone, and create healthy soil when the material composts. And within that, there are all these other impact metrics. And so something we're struggling with early on is, how do you achieve every single impact goal that you have, and then also be a competitive product and also scale? And where can you find compromises in there? And I think as we've matured, we've found more focus on, this is the definite impact we can achieve today. We know that we can work with smaller scale farmers in remote regions of the world in the future. We're going to build a system that allows us to work with them when we're ready, that kind of thing. It's like, how do you not compromise on all the impact that you want to achieve?
Where would you say you are in the, I think I know your answer, but in the sort of the acceptance and adoption cycle of what it is you're trying to produce? Do you feel like it's still very early days and you're working with pretty informed tastemakers, or where would you classify yourself at today?
It's early days. I would say, even if a brand that we meet with doesn't have a really stringent or robust approach to replacing plastics within their supply chain, they're always eager to talk to this new material, or this new approach. No one's trying to bring more plastics into their brand. So it's a very receptive environment. I think, the question is just, can we initially in the beginning afford that premium? And what's the real return on investment going to be? Are customers going to really understand that this is a material that came from the ocean and turns into soil at the end of its life? So that remains to be seen, but we'll have answers to that pretty soon.
So your background is art direction, correct? Design and art direction.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you feel like that strength has helped you with what you're doing? Because again, you are marketing something that has a premium to it. Do you feel like building a brand and being strong storytellers and be able to visualize these things has helped you along the way, or what would you say about that?
I hope so. I mean, my goal is that it's not just the sustainability team at any given company that wants to work with us. We want to get the whole team on board. We want the CFO, cheering for seaweed and for soy, and we want everybody to understand it. And then we also want brands to get the most bang for their buck, right? That these are stories they can tell to their community that are really going to resonate and make people feel good about themselves. So it's definitely been a focus for Sway to be not just a material technology company, but to also provide the impact reporting and the narratives that are needed to really increase transparency and build excitement and adoption. I think across climate tech and across climate solutions, there are a lot of very complicated, inaccessible solutions that most people will not have access to, or really the patience to figure out. And so we're in that cool kind of category where we can really explain, this is where this material came, this material came from an ocean farm, and we can tell you the name of the guy who grew your bag. That's an amazing opportunity to make someone feel like they're a part of the movement, and it's not some, lofty thing off in the distance.
Well, I applaud what you guys have done, because from my seat, some of the people who are doing some of the most innovative things really struggle with commercialization, and how do you tell the story, and how do you then distribute that innovation. You guys are working on something that's very innovative, but you're very skilled at telling your story, building a brand, making people want to associate, I think, with what it is you're doing. And that is typically, in my view, the piece that's missing. So that's often what we try to do to help others, is say, hey, this is great. Let us help you tell that story. Let's make sure that you can capitalize on top of this thing that you're trying to bring into the world. But you guys are doing that. And I think it's just, thanks, I would imagine that, when you say you're in these associating with brands like Tom Ford and Nike, that's not a surprise because of what you guys are doing, the way you're telling that story. So, but I think I would like to see more brands have that ability, and some of them it's just not their strength. It seems like you guys have that strength, and so you're using it to the best of your advantage.
I appreciate that. Well, we'll see. We haven't launched pilots yet, so it's early days. We'll see. I hope that this, it's our theory. So I hope our theory comes true. But I'm curious because I think oftentimes, and this is my experience as a designer, a lot of folks perceive design as a method of just, creating beauty in the world. But I think that design can be used as a tool to create work of consequence. And I'm curious how often you find yourself in a position where you're able to illuminate or like draw the lines between beauty and impact in your work.
I think it depends on if you spell it with a capital D or not. And,
right.
Design with a capital D is very different than sort of visual design, right? But I think the methods for how you get there are similar. It's very similar to the word innovation. It's like, can we do this better? And what's the process of evaluating why this isn't working well? And how do we sort of architect a new system of some sort? So it's nice when people who understand design thinking can apply that to worthwhile pursuits and kind of question, why is this the way it is? It seems not great. And is there a better way? And you start, and sometimes you dig in, you're like, wow, this is a tough one. The other time it's like, oh, here's the solution right here. Why nobody took the time to look that way. So yeah.
And consistently, the more time I spend in the climate space, I encounter so many solutions. Being in this type of category where you're working a lot with oceans, you're working with materials, you're working with brands, you're constantly confronted with the intensity of the climate crisis, but then you're also constantly meeting other solutions. There's so many, there's so much reason to be hopeful. And I feel like design often will be the key between something being meaningfully adopted or not. Like we are humans, we are resistant to change. If you make it easy for us, then it's more likely that it's gonna scale. So
I'm very passionate about the momentum of the early adopters getting to the mainstream, and I think that's a very tough thing to do. And so I'm always a big fan of anybody who's making early progress, and really hoping that they can it goes beyond just those kind of the early few. Because it is so tough. Because the mainstream doesn't want to take a chance. They would just want to look at somebody who's, they admire and be like, well, they're doing it, so maybe I should try. And so again, the way where you're sort of entering the market with these really, in some cases, top tier brands, that's great. That's what we need is for people who we admire to put their endorsement on it, so other people will follow suit. Because now all of a sudden it's like, cool, right? And so if there is a premium to it initially, the brand that comes with that covers the premium, right? Because now I'm associated with this brand who I put a really high value on. I think those are the types of steps that we definitely need to take across the board. But I agree with you. The more you learn about climate, I think you go through this initial wave of like, oh my gosh, how are we going to do this? And then the more you study and see what some people have discovered, sometimes it's like, oh, this is right in front of us. Now we just have to change our habits. and some of the decisions that we make. And that's where I'm very hopeful of, like, man, can we get those solutions are becoming available now? Can we change our habits? That's tough, but that's the work that needs to be done.
Yeah, I feel though, when, the moment that, Beyond Burger makes its way into Costco, or, a seaweed bag makes its way into Target, all of a sudden it's not so much of a hard choice. It's right there in front of you. And I think that increasingly within these next years, you're going to see a much easier choice presented to most shoppers, not just a select few. It's not going to, be isolated to Whole Foods and, what have you. We had the opportunity to work with Target and Walmart and CVS within the Beyond the Bag Challenge, which was organized by Closed Loop. And that was another scenario where these are the decision makers and the folks who really determine how materials are used and like what are the standards that we set for packaging. And it's so cool to see buy-in across those teams supporting new solutions like ours. And there were reuse systems that were being implemented, and there were technological solutions, and then there were new materials. And I think the more incubation models like that happen, where direct competitors are collaborating to bring about that change, the better. Like, that's so meaningful for a company like ours in those early days to get that kind of validation. It's the only way that that you can raise money or that you can get traction otherwise.
That's great for them too, because they are it's good R&D for them. It's great PR. I mean, just selfishly, it's great PR for them. So it feels like everybody's winning in those types of scenarios.
Yeah.
What has been one of the more rewarding moments for you and your team so far?
Shoot. Yeah, beyond winning the prizes and the awards, I'd say it's been really rewarding building out the team to the size that it is now, and getting set up in a physical space and building out our lab has been really rewarding, because it takes all these abstract concepts that we've been talking about related to our supply chain and related to impact and brings them into physical form. So I'd say, yeah, it's just really rewarding to see your material being made in front of you with your machinery in real life, with all the people that made it happen on this journey, because material innovation takes time, and it's hard. So definitely that's super rewarding.
I can see how locked in you are, because that answer took a second for you to think about, and I can relate to the same thing. I've had people come up to me, they're like, who've asked similar questions. I'm like, I've not stopped to think about it.
Yeah.
I'm just I'm charging hard forward. I'm not thinking about, is this fun or not? So I can relate.
I would say that for the team. I would say, if you were to zoom out and say what personally has been very rewarding, it's the opportunity to connect with other like-minded folks across industries. My co-founder Matt and I were able to go to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation Circular Innovation Expo in London a couple months ago. And it was the first time that we got to present Sway, from the pandemic in a physical space and show our product to real people. That was so rewarding to hear the words regeneration and seaweed being spoken by all these industry folks who know what it takes to scale solutions and know how hard it is. That was very rewarding.
That's awesome.
I need to ask this question more frequently though.
Yeah. Were there other reactions that you got from that or some other recent get-togethers?
Positive or just reactions in general?
Either way. Anything you'd like to share?
Let's see. Well,
let's do this. Is there one that it bothers you that this one gets brought up?
That's a scandalous question. I would say,
or myths that you have to dispel.
Yeah. There's a lot of skepticism of new materials and of quote unquote green products in general. And I think that's very justified. there's an insane amount of greenwashing. And
Mm-hmm.
every time you lift the hood on new materials, you discover something that maybe doesn't align with how it's been marketed. So that's a huge amount of our work. And that's a huge reason why design plays such a role, is how can I assure you that we've done all the legwork, that we've traced exactly where our seaweed's coming from, that we've gotten it certified by, the right folks, that we've tested it in the right circumstances, that it actually decomposes. But that's actually one of the beauties of making compostable materials as opposed to recycling, because compost is the only end of life that you and I can literally see in front of us. Like, I'm going to put soy packaging in my compost bin. I'm going to watch it disappear over a few weeks. But I hope that kind of dispels the feeling of secrets or greenwashing, because you can physically watch it decompose into soil.
It's an important point. We were just talking internally with our team about, what of our recycling is actually carbon benefits, is a benefit to carbon, which ones actually use more carbon to go through the recycling process. And we're it's almost pointless, which is really defeating whenever you learn those things after years of recycling those materials. You're like, oh, this hasn't even really been that huge of a benefit.
Right. Yeah,
I
love the idea
those things all the time.
I love the idea of carbon labeling to give you insight. Even if a product's not perfect, at least like the recent campaign between Adidas and Allbirds, where they label every product with the carbon data. I think hyper traceability is going to be so helpful with not just apparel, but food, and with packaging eventually, that you can scan a QR code and, like I mentioned, look and learn where the seaweed was grown and where it was manufactured, just to kind of alleviate that sense of skepticism, and also be accountable if a product is imperfect, but it's on a path to improvement. It's like, I'd rather you be honest with me than tell me something that's not true.
Yeah. One of the things I'm very curious about is what carbon accounting looks like in the future. It seems like it's something that's going to be necessary. Probably will create a ton of jobs for people who think like that. It's not me.
Right.
That hurts my brain just to even try to go through it. But more of that would be very beneficial for someone to do that math and for it to be trusted. And for us to see where we're at. I'm curious about when it comes along and what it'll look like. And is that going to be part of every kind of labeling for CPG, and what would that look like for other categories? I don't know. I believe it will come along. I don't know.
There's some really cool companies that are emerging, because it is so historically really expensive, especially for an early stage company like mine to afford that kind of accounting. We can do a lot in-house. But there are some new companies that are emerging that are making it a lot easier and more streamlined and just a better user experience, like Planet Forward. Eon has an individualized tracking carbon ID for each garment produced. So there's some cool solutions that are starting to make their way into the mainstream. And I'm very sure that there will only be more of them.
Yeah, that's cool. I think it's an opportunity I feel like we're sort of emerging out of this phase where, and again, I could be wrong on this, but my view is that we've used sort of awareness of the problem and a lot of kind of guilt and peer pressure to make people feel kind of bad about the status quo. And I'm hopeful that we're moving into this new phase where that will probably always exist in some level, but there's just a lot more people who are encouraging and positive about the ones who are making some progress. And has there been anybody who's emerged as perfect? Not yet, probably never will be. But can we give credit to the people who are making some efforts and showing some gains and putting a plan together and making effort on that? Like, that's what I'm very supportive of, is we don't expect perfection, but we can be real with where we're at today and make progress, and every little incremental piece helps, right? And I think the more people can move away a little bit from the peer pressure and into more of the positive reinforcements, I think we'll see more progress more quickly.
Absolutely. I think you just perfectly described climate optimism, which has a huge role to play in keeping folks motivated. pretty critical. And that's why I love the concept of regeneration so much, because it says, let's create systems that make life even healthier than they were before. That's a very unifying idea. Everyone can get on board with that. You can help address climate change, but you can also have just better food and cleaner homes and better materials and healthier soil than you did before. Why not do that? Easy. I'm on board. And then you can feel good about the work that you're doing and the way that you're living your life, and know that you're contributing to combating climate change. And yeah, not get so overwhelmed by the vastness of the problem. Climate optimism.